This is Gardening in America, and I'm Ed Hume. Today we're in Lake Wales, Florida. We're at the Bok Tower Gardens, and I'm with David Price, the Director of Horticulture. Whereabouts are the gardens, David?
We're located in Lake Wales and on the Lake Wales Ridge in central Florida. We're about 50 miles south of Orlando. The gardens I mentioned are in Lake Wales Ridge. It's the highest point in peninsular Florida.
It's beautiful. Tell me a little bit about the tower.
Well, the tower was built and dedicated in 1929 by Edward Bach, and he dedicated it to the visitation of the American people. He created the gardens as a spiritual place, not a religious place, but a spiritual place for meditation, for people to come and enjoy birds and the animal life and the plant life.
Tell me a little bit about Edward Bach.
Well, Edward Bach made his money in the publishing business. He was very concerned with conservation issues, civic issues. He had sponsored a World Peace Prize, International Peace Prize, donated $10,000 to the best world peace paper that could be written at the time, and was very influential in forming the League of Nations. So he really looked to better all of humanity, and this garden was built as his gift to the American people.
And tell me a little bit about the trees around the tower, too.
Well, the trees, Edward Bach hired landscape architect Frederick Law Olmsted, and Olmsted was very partial to the native plant life here. And many of the canopy trees we have here, what we're standing under is the live oak tree. These are native Florida trees, and what Olmsted wanted to recreate here was a hammock effect. And a hammock is a term, it's an Indian term for protected area.
Oh, yes.
And in Florida there are natural areas that are called hammocks, and these areas are heavy with oak trees and palm trees. Also the water effects we have in the gardens, the pools and all, also are reminiscent of the Florida native hammocks.
You have some really interesting underplantings now here.
Yes, we have a big variety of underplantings. We're not considered a botanical garden, but a historic landscape garden. We plant a variety of both native and exotic plants for year-round interest.
When's the best time to visit the gardens?
Well, throughout the year we have different times of the year where we have peaks. Our best time for visitation in terms of color and the pleasantness of the weather is around from January to March. The acres of citrus grove around us are in full color at that time.
Oh, wow. Is there an admission fee to the gardens?
Yes, we have a nominal admission fee.
And how many acres does a garden cover?
The foundation property is about 160 acres. The landscape gardens are about 50 acres. In the other areas, we have natural areas. We have an ecological management plan where we burn off our areas to encourage the native wildflowers and the native grasses.
Beautiful. Thank you for sharing it with us.
Well, thank you.
Believe it or not, there are some plants that really create interest during the winter season. For example, look at the gorgeous Helleborus here. This is a Royal Heritage strain one, and it's an early flowering one. And of course, there's some that'll flower a little bit later in the season, into January, and some even into February. Some single and some double. A great plant for a semi-shaded part of the garden for winter color. And look at, here's one that's not in bloom, in any way, but look at the gorgeous foliage, and what a nice addition that is to the garden during the winter season. This is Nandina, and this happens to be a dwarf one. The common name is heavenly bamboo. And then this one comes in just a little bit later. This is Sarcococo, and the flowers on this are small and they're white, and it loves the shade, but very, very fragrant. A great plant for the shaded part of the garden, often used by the entry area because of the fragrance of the flower, generally in the month of February. And look at the winter flowering heather. There are about a dozen different varieties that flower during the winter season that provide color for a long period of time. This one, for example, for about 6 months into the winter and spring as well. And the berried plants. This happens to be wintergreen, and there are lots of other varieties that provide a lot of interest in the garden. And this is the Skimmia. This happens to be the male one, the pollinizing variety, with a very attractive flower. The female has red berries, very attractive as well. And then, of course, the Sasanqua camellia. This is the winter flowering one. Some of them start flowering, about Thanksgiving time. Others will flower into the month of December, and some even into the month of January, at a time when you don't have a lot of color in the garden. So as you can see, these are only a few of the interesting plants that provide winter color, and you can include them in your landscape at this time of the year to brighten up your garden. They're available at your local nursery and garden center. Right now, during the dormant season, is an excellent time to select and plant roses. Today we're at the nursery, and I want to give you a few pointers on things I look for when I select roses. For example, the first thing is you want to see what kind of rose it is. This is a hybrid tea rose. That means it'll have a single stem and a large flower, ideal for cutting, but also a very pretty rose in the garden as well, and kind of an unusual color, isn't it? Really nice. Here's another one. This is also a hybrid tea, and the reason why I call your attention to this is an unusual lavender color, a color that's kind of difficult to pick up in roses, and sometimes we like to include unusual roses in the garden as well. Now here's another one. This is a climbing rose, so we need to note that. Very often we want, for example, red roses for in the garden. But this is one that's going to climb, so you've got to be sure that you have a support for it to climb on. Really very important. And here's another one. This is a shrub rose, and a very pretty variety, by the way. Now the important thing here is to keep in mind that this is only going to grow about so high, but instead of standing upright, it's going to kind of lay down a little bit. In other words, the branches are going to have a bend to them. So it is used then as a shrub rose, not as a regular bush rose. So you might use this for hedging, for example, along the edge of the property or in areas similar to that. Now, there are two other types here. This is a David Austin rose, brand new for this year. This is one that has been developed from the old-fashioned roses. So it has that old-fashioned fragrance and has the growth of the old-fashioned roses, but the beauty of it is that it flowers all summer long. In other words, it's an everbloomer. And then this one up here is a grandiflora rose. Grandiflora meaning that it has the large flowers, but it has more than one flower per stem. So again, ideal for cutting purposes. Now back here are different types of roses. Here they are right here. The Floribunda roses. These are low growing, very bushy, small flowers and short stems. So they're very often used in the foreground to the other types of roses. So that gives you an idea of the different types of roses. Now what do we look for? Here's an excellent rose. As you can see, it has a nice curvature, 4 canes, and we always look for roses that have 3 to 5 canes. So this fits in perfectly. Be a great selection and a good one to add to the garden. In fact, this is one I'll add to my own garden. Now that I've showed you how to pick a rose at the nursery, now let's take it home and I'll show you how to plant it. This is a perfect day for planting roses, and I've selected Double Delight Rose because of its fantastic fragrance. A dark, cloudy winter day is ideal for planting or transplanting. And to select roses and plant them now is a great idea. So let's take a minute and prepare the planting hole first of all. I've dug a hole, as you can see here. Now is what we do with roses is that we always add organic matter to the soil. And in this case, I'm going to add a combination of peat moss and processed manure, because roses like well-rotted manure. And I'll mix that in the bottom, but what I'm going to do next is to take some of this soil that I took out of the planting hole in the first place and make a cone right in the middle here. And then again, I'm going to add more peat moss and organic humus and mix that up again with that soil, like so, forming the cone once again. Now, why do we form a cone is because we want to spread the roots over that surface. So now the next thing is, and I realize that when you get these, it'll say that you can plant box and all. Don't do that. Take them out of the box. This box is supposed to disintegrate, but I sure wouldn't rely upon it. I think it's a much better idea to just tear the box away completely. And that'll just take me a minute to do. And you might want to be a little bit careful because you might want to save the rose itself, the picture I mean, and you might also want to save the planting instructions. But as what I'm going to do, you can see there's a planting medium around that. We'll use that, mix it in with some of the surrounding soil. Now, you can see that the root system has been cut back also. So, there's not as large a root system as normally would develop. I always like to turn it around so that the crown faces the south, because that's where the maximum sunlight is. Then over this cone, I'll spread the roots like so. Now, in the climate, depends upon where you are, but in a warm climate, this would be 2 inches above ground. In a cold climate, it would be 2 inches, the graft would be below the ground. We're just about right here. And all I need to do then is to just spread in a little bit of soil around the base. And again, I'm going to put just a little bit more of the peat moss and processed manure, like so. And then next, fill the rest of the hole in. It's that simple. And by the way, I want to get this so that bud union is right at about ground level. And I'll firm it down. I'm not going to tap it down with my feet at all. It's that easy, and now's a good time to plant or transplant those roses. This is a great time to take cuttings during the winter dormant season. And let's take several different kinds. This is an ivy, for example, and you'll notice here it's already started to take root. So it's what we can actually do is just cut below that point, and we don't even really have to put this in any kind of rooting hormone or anything else. But nevertheless, I will. And shake off any excess. This is just a regular rooting powder. And I'll put my finger in first. That makes the hole, and then put the cutting in. Oops, I didn't get the entire root system. I'm going to make it a little bit larger. There we go. And I'm going to pick off this lower leaf because that kind of interferes. There we go. And we don't want to have a leaf pick up any kind of insect or disease out of the soil and affect the rest of the cutting too. Now, we could also, if we wanted to, go down here. And let me show you, just below a node is a place where a leaf developed. And we can take a second cutting there, and I'll remove that lower leaf, but leave the top one intact. Again, just dip it in a little bit of rooting hormone, shake off the excess, and I'll also strike that. Now, on this rhododendron, there are a couple things you need to know. First of all, take out the flower bud in the top, because we don't want any moisture or strength going to that flower bud. Second thing is, then, I'll turn this around so you can see it, is pick off all the lower leaves. Now, we'll do all of them. Now, here's another one. That only leaves a few leaves on the top, doesn't it? We'll gather those together and cut off about half of those leaves. Now, the reason why we do that is if you leave the whole leaf, there's too much loss of moisture or transpiration through the leaves. Second thing is we'll go down the stem here, and we need to make a new cut first of all, but we'll look for a node. Again, there is a node right there, and I'll cut just below that point. And that's a little bit long. I like to have those cuttings just a little bit shorter than that. I'd rather have it down about here or so. But for experiment purposes and to show you, that's how we'll do it, and we'll strike that cutting. Okay, here's another type of rhododendron. This, in fact, happens to be one of the little species rhododendron, so we'll take even shorter cuttings. And I'll go right below a leaf or a node, cut it like so, remove all the lower leaves once again, and since this is such a short cutting, once again I'll gather the top leaves together, and I'll remove half of them. Dip it in a rooting hormone, And in this case, I'm going to strike this one in the perlite. Put it in an area where it'll get some heat from the bottom. That's really important, like on top of the refrigerator. Take your cuttings now. I'm often asked several questions about these beautiful Japanese lace leaf maple. When is the best time to prune them? When's the best time to fertilize them? Well, the plant is deciduous. They're barren of leaves at this time of the year. So that's a good time to prune them. And the reason is that you can look in here and see if there are any dead branches. Now, this happens to be a dead branch. You can see the difference. See how white this is and how dark the others are? So we can go in and cut back then to live wood and get any of that dead wood out. Also, if we want to do any shaping of the plant, now that it's barren of leaves is a good time to do it. Don't feed the plant now. The best time to feed it is just before the new growth starts in springtime, and you use usually a rose type fertilizer to feed them. Okay, notice one other thing here too. Around the base there are quite a few weeds, but this one in particular is covered with mildew. Now, we don't want to leave weeds in the ground that are hosts to insects and diseases. I'm sure if we look very closely, there's probably some insects as well on this weed. So let's get them out. I know this isn't the easiest time of the year to weed the garden, but if you can get the ones that are infected, it's really important to get them out of the garden. Okay, so we'll eliminate that completely. Now, let's talk a little bit about that Christmas tree that you had this year. One of the great things to do is to go in and cut your perennials back after the holiday season, or as soon as they're kind of over the hill, you might say, and get them back into shape like this. And if they tend to be a little bit on the tender side, is what we'll do. By the way, I'll add all these greens to the compost pile, so I'll recycle them in that way. But is what we'll also do, if this tended to be a little bit on the tender side, I would take some of the branches from the Christmas tree, or we've had a big windstorm and some of them have fallen to the ground, and I'd take those branches and just cover over very lightly, just place them over the plants like so. And what a great way to provide protection for that plant throughout the winter season. It's a very easy process, and it recycles your Christmas tree. Of course, later the greens that are left when the weather warms up can be added to the compost pile. One other question. Down in here on this rhododendron, you'll see some yellow leaves. Those are old leaves. Don't worry about them. Because the new leaves are on top, it has cut off the light to the bottom of the plant, and these leaves can't produce chlorophyll any longer, so they turn yellow, and they do that at different seasons of the year. This happens to be doing it during the winter, and it's no problem at all. Those are just a few things that you can give some attention to in the garden right now. We're on the island of Maui in the Hawaiian Islands, and I'm with Warren McCord, the owner of Kula Botanical Gardens. Warren, whereabouts are the gardens located?
This is a fairly unique garden for the state of Hawaii because it's not located on the coast. We are at 3,300 feet up on the slopes of Haleakala on the upper road of Kula.
You know, there are so many interesting things here, but I know one of the trees here kind of behind us but off to the side is one of your favorites.
It is. It's a Banksia, member of the Protea family, and as far as I know, it's a fairly unique specimen. It is not commercially valuable, but it's so beautiful that we find that it's one of the favorite plants in the garden for our guests.
It has such a beautiful texture on the bark, and the flowers are gorgeous on it too, and very unusual, as you mentioned. But you have quite a few Banksia here, don't you?
We do. We have an extensive collection of Banksias, Proteas. Those are parts of the Protea family. The Protea family is very large. We carry about 60 to 65 varieties.
How large are the gardens? How many acres?
The part that you walk through is approximately 6 acres, but we say the garden's 14.
Oh, wow.
But part of it is just to be looked at.
It's on a hillside with a beautiful view of the valley in the distance. Now, also I noticed back here, kind of behind us, of all things, a southern magnolia.
Yes.
Yeah, that's unusual.
Well, we have plants from all over the world.
Oh, you do?
This is really not a tropical garden, although we can grow some tropicals. It's more of a temperate garden because it gets cool in the evenings, particularly 3 months of the year, which would be, the December, January, February. But during the day, it's always 70, 72 degrees. So we can grow a tremendous variety of things from all over the world.
Oh, yeah. And I noticed that as I visited the garden. Is what I like about your garden, too, is that botanical gardens are usually just plants. And to the homeowner, they're not too interesting, but you've added color to the garden.
Well, we thought that was necessary because people come here and spend quite a bit of time and they want to take pictures, and the little plants that you see in the foreground are just adding color to their memories of Hawaii.
Yeah, it's absolutely beautiful. What's the best time to visit the gardens?
Well, it depends on what you want to see.
I see.
The proteas and the orchids are winter bloomers, but there's always color and interesting plants to see all year round.
Okay. What are your hours?
9 to 4 every day.
Okay.
We're open Christmas, New Year's.
Is there an admission fee?
There is. We have a small admission fee to help pay for the water and the people that maintain the garden and pay for the taxes.
Thanks, Warren. That's all the time we have today. Hope you can join me at the same time next time for Gardening in America. And remember, our relationship with the planet today is tomorrow's future. Have a great week.